"Grandma, why don't you just sit in the kitchen? It'll be more comfortable for you there." Those words still echo in my mind, even now, 3 years later. My own grandson, Marcus, saying that to me on Thanksgiving Day, like I was some kind of afterthought. Not family, not the woman who had changed his diapers and sung him to sleep. Just an old black woman who didn't fit at their fancy dining table with the crystal glasses and the matching napkins. I'm Dorothy Mae Johnson, 68 years old, and I've never told anyone this story before. But today, as I sit here looking at another Thanksgiving invitation from my son Calvin's family, I feel like it's time. Some burdens are too heavy to carry alone, even for shoulders as strong as mine. I was born in Clarksdale, Mississippi, back in 1957, when being black in America meant you learned early on where you belonged and where you didn't. My mama and daddy worked the cotton fields, their hands cracked and bleeding so I could have school books and shoes that fit. Education is freedom, Mama would say every morning as she braided my hair tight against my scalp. They can take everything else, but they can't take what's in here. And she'd tap my forehead with her calloused finger. I listened. Lord knows I listened. First in my class all through school, even when the white teachers acted like answering their questions was some kind of insult. I got a scholarship to Jackson State, worked nights cleaning office buildings, and became the first person in my family to get a college degree. That diploma might as well have been made of gold, for how proud my parents were. When I met James at church in 1978, he was handsome in his Army uniform, with dreams as big as the Mississippi sky. "We're going north," he told me on our 3rd date. "Going to make something of ourselves where our children won't have to drink from separate water fountains." I believed him. I always believed James, even when I shouldn't have. We settled in Cincinnati, bought a little house in Avondale, and I started teaching at the elementary school while James worked at the General Electric plant. Calvin came first in 1980, perfect and beautiful, with his father's dimples and my determined chin. Then Lisa 2 years later, my fierce little girl, who was walking and talking before the doctor, said she should. Those early years were sweet as peach cobbler. Every Sunday we'd have dinner after church, the table groaning with my fried chicken, greens, macaroni, and cheese, and cornbread so light it would float right off your plate if you weren't careful. "Nobody cooks like my Dorothy," James would announce, patting his stomach. "This woman's food could bring peace to the Middle East." The children would giggle, and I'd swat at him with my dish towel, pretending I didn't love every word. But somewhere along the way, things changed. Maybe it was when Calvin got that scholarship to Ohio State and started bringing home friends whose parents were doctors and lawyers. Maybe it was when Lisa married Theodore, who worked in finance, a word he said like it was made of something precious. Or maybe it was when James died suddenly of a heart attack in 2010, leaving me alone in that house, filled with memories, but suddenly too quiet. Calvin married Vanessa in 2012, a beautiful, light-skinned woman with a business degree and family money. From the beginning I could feel it, the way her eyes slid over our family photos, the slight purse of her lips when I mentioned growing up in Mississippi, the way she'd rearrange the food I brought to their house in nicer serving dishes. "Mom, Vanessa's just particular," Calvin would say whenever I mentioned it. "She likes things a certain way." And I tried. Lord knows I tried. I bought new clothes for visits to their big house in the suburbs. I watched how I talked, pushing away the Mississippi that still lived in my vowels. I brought store-bought desserts instead of my homemade sweet potato pie because Vanessa once mentioned something about hygiene standards in home kitchens. But nothing was ever enough. When my first grandchild, Marcus, was born, Vanessa's mother stayed in their guest room for 3 weeks. I was welcome to visit between 2 and 4 p.m. on Saturdays. When little Zoe came 2 years later, I wasn't even called until she was 3 days old. We just wanted some private time, Calvin explained, not quite meeting my eyes. You understand, don't you, Mom? And I said I did, because that's what black mothers of my generation do. We understand. We accommodate. We swallow our hurt like bitter medicine and smile anyway. Then came that Thanksgiving 3 years ago. Calvin had called 2 weeks before, his voice unusually bright. Mom, we want you to come for Thanksgiving this year. The whole family will be there. Lisa and Theo are flying in from Atlanta, and Vanessa's parents are coming too. My heart soared like a gospel choir on Easter Sunday. Finally, I thought. Finally. I'm being welcomed into the fold. I spent days preparing. Bought a new dress, purple with silver threads, that the saleswoman said brought out the richness of my skin. Got my hair done at Shanice's salon, sitting under the dryer for hours while the women traded stories and laughter wrapped around us like a warm blanket. I asked what I could bring, and Calvin said, Nothing, Mom. Vanessa has it all. Planned out. I brought something anyway. My grandmother's crystal candy dish, filled with the peanut brittle that Calvin loved as a boy. Some traditions are too precious to abandon. When I arrived at their house in Mason, where the lawns look like they're measured with rulers and every mailbox matches the shutters, Vanessa's mother Judith answered the door. Her smile was as tight as her facelift. Dorothy, she said, air kissing somewhere near my cheek. Don't you look festive? The house smelled of turkey and tension. Lisa and Theo were already there, Lisa rushing to hug me with genuine warmth that nearly brought tears to my eyes. Marcus and Zoe were dressed like little catalog models, but they ran to me with sticky hands and real smiles. Grandma brought candy, Zoe announced, spotting my offering. Oh, Vanessa said, appearing from the kitchen in a spotless apron that looked like it had never met flour. That's thoughtful, Dorothy, but the children have already had their dessert allowance for today. And just like that, my offering was taken and disappeared somewhere I never saw again. When it was time to eat, that's when Marcus, my sweet grandson, who used to fall asleep on my chest, said those words that cut deeper than any knife. Grandma, why don't you just sit in the kitchen? It'll be more comfortable for you there. The dining room table was set for 8. There were 9 of us. I looked at Calvin, waiting for him to say something, to make room, to stand up for his mother. But he just looked at his expensive shoes and murmured, The kitchen has a nice view of the backyard, Mom. In that moment, standing there in my new purple dress with my freshly done hair, I felt myself shrink, become invisible, become the help. And I went to the kitchen, sat at the little breakfast bar and ate turkey that tasted like ashes while the laughter from the dining room washed over me in waves. Because that's what we do, isn't it? We endure, we survive, we smile through pain that would break others in half. But something inside me broke that day. Something I'm not sure can ever be fixed. And now, looking at this year's invitation in my hands, I have to decide if I'm strong enough to walk back into that house and take my place at the kitchen counter again. Or if, after 68 years of bending, it's finally time to stand straight. I didn't go to Thanksgiving at Calvin's house the following year. I called 2 days before and told him I had caught a bad cold, voice raspy and weak over the phone. It was the first time I had ever lied to my son. Oh no, Mom. Do you need anything? I can drop some soup by. His concern sounded genuine, which somehow made it worse. No, baby. I've got everything I need. You just enjoy your family." The words tasted bitter in my mouth. Your family. As if I wasn't part of it anymore. Truth was, I spent that Thanksgiving day alone in my house, watching old movies and eating a turkey sandwich from the deli down the street. I called Lisa in Atlanta, and she asked why I wasn't at Calvin's. When I told her about the kitchen incident, from the year before, the silence on the other end of the line stretched so long, I thought we'd been disconnected. "Mama, why didn't you tell me?" she finally said, her voice thick with emotion. "What good would it have done, baby? Some hurts are just meant to be carried alone." "No, they're not," she said fiercely. "Not in this family. My Lisa, always the fighter, even as a little girl standing up to playground bullies twice her size. But this wasn't a schoolyard scrap. This was the slow, painful drift of family bonds coming undone, thread by thread. After we hung up, I sat in my quiet living room looking at the old photographs lining my walls. James and me on our wedding day, Calvin's high school graduation, Lisa holding baby Marcus for the first time, moments frozen in time when we were still whole, still connected by something stronger than blood, by love and shared history, and the unspoken understanding that we would always have each other's backs. When had that changed? When had I become an inconvenience rather than the backbone of this family? I thought back to my own grandmother, Mama Pearl, who lived with us until I was 12. She was the keeper of stories, the wisdom bearer, the one who taught me how to make biscuits so light they'd make you cry, and how to read the weather in the way the birds flew. In our house, she had the seat of honor at every meal. Daddy would wash her feet every Sunday night, a ritual of respect that made her queen of our humble domain. "Your people are your anchor in this world," she used to tell me. "Without them, you're just drifting." I felt like I was drifting now, untethered from the family I had sacrificed everything to build. The holidays passed, winter melted into spring, and I kept myself busy with my church work and my garden. I've always found peace with my hands in the soil, coaxing life from tiny seeds. There's something holy about growing things, about participating in creation. Some days I'd be on my knees among my tomato plants, the sun warm on my back, and I'd feel James there with me, chuckling about my dirt therapy the way he used to. "Lord, I miss you," I'd whisper to the empty air beside me. "You'd know what to do about all this." In April, I got a call from Marcus. He was 15 now, his voice cracking between boy and man. "Grandma, can I come stay with you for a few days?" My heart leapt, but caution tempered my response. "Does your mama know you're calling me?" The pause told me everything. "Marcus, what's going on?" I just need somewhere to go. Dad and Mom are fighting all the time, and I can't focus on anything. And Zoe cries every night, and..." His voice broke, and the sound of my grandson trying not to cry shattered something inside me. "You come on, baby. Grandma's door is always open to you." He arrived an hour later, a backpack slung over one shoulder, and dark circles under his eyes that no child should have. I fed him fried chicken and greens, watched as he ate 3 helpings like he'd been starving, and then made up the guest room with fresh sheets that smelled of sunshine from hanging on my backyard line. That night, sitting on the edge of his bed, Marcus finally told me what was happening at home. "Dad's company is in trouble, some kind of financial thing I don't understand. But he might lose his job, and Mom is freaking out about money all the time. She says they might have to sell the house, and she keeps blaming Dad, saying she gave up her career to be a mother, and now look where it got her." I nodded, letting him talk. Years of teaching elementary school having taught me that sometimes the best thing you can do is just listen. "And last night," he continued, voice dropping to almost a whisper. I heard Mom on the phone with Grandma Judith. She said marrying into a family like ours was the biggest mistake of her life. The words hit me like a physical blow. A family like ours. I knew exactly what that meant, even if Marcus, in his innocence, might not have fully understood. Your mama's just scared right now, I said, smoothing his hair back from his forehead the way I used to when he was small. People say things they don't mean when they're afraid. But even as I said it, I wondered if that was true. Or had Vanessa just finally said out loud what she'd been thinking all along? Marcus stayed with me for 3 days. We baked cookies, worked in the garden, and I taught him to play bid whist, laughing at his concentration face that was so like his grandfather's, it made my chest ache. On the 3rd day, Calvin showed up at my door, looking like he hadn't slept in weeks. Mom, he said, and then stopped, seeming unsure what to say next. I opened my arms and my grown son stepped into them like he was still my little boy. We stood in my entryway, holding each other, while Marcus watched silently from the living room. Later, after Marcus had gone upstairs to pack his things, Calvin and I sat at my kitchen table with mugs of coffee cooling between us. I'm sorry, he said, staring into his cup, for everything, for Thanksgiving, for not standing up for you. Why didn't you? I asked, the question that had been burning in me for 1.5 years finally finding voice. He sighed, rubbing his hand across his face. I don't know, Mama. I wish I had a better answer for you, I guess. I've spent so long trying to build this life, this image. The successful black man with the perfect family in the perfect house. And somewhere along the way, I started believing that meant I had to distance myself from where I came from. From me, I said, not as a question. Yes, he admitted, shame coloring the word. From you, from your accent, from the way we lived, from all of it. And Vanessa, she comes from money, from people who have always had it. She doesn't understand what it means to climb up from nothing. And you never told her, never explained. I wanted her to see me as I am now, not where I came from. I reached across the table and took his hand. Calvin Johnson, where you came from is not something to be ashamed of. Your father and I might not have had much, but we had dignity. We had love. We had faith. And we raised you to be proud of who you are. Tears filled his eyes. I know, Mama. I know that now. But I think maybe my marriage is over. The words hung in the air between us, heavy with grief and something else. Possibility, the possibility of rebuilding what had been broken, of finding our way back to each other, through the wreckage. Before I could respond, Marcus came back downstairs, backpack now full, face solemn. Ready, Dad? Calvin nodded, standing up. Thanks, Mom, for taking care of him, for everything. I walked them to the door, hugged them both tight, and watched as they got into Calvin's car and drove away. As they turned the corner, I had the strangest feeling, like something that had been frozen for a long time was finally beginning to thaw. That night I called Lisa in Atlanta and told her everything. About Marcus's visit, about Calvin's confession, about the fractures in his marriage. I'm coming home, she said immediately. Theo and we've been talking about moving back to Ohio anyway. His company has an office in Cincinnati. The kids miss having family around. Lisa, honey, don't make decisions based on your old mama. It's not just for you, she said. It's for all of us. Family is too precious to let drift apart. As I hung up the phone, I looked again at those photographs on my wall. The faces of the people I loved most in this world, And for the first time in a long while, I felt that maybe, just maybe, we could find our way back to being whole again. But the road ahead wouldn't be smooth. I knew that. Some wounds leave scars that never fully fade. And some words, once spoken, can never be taken back. A week later, Calvin called again. His voice was tight, controlled in a way that told me he was barely holding himself together. "Vanessa's left," he said without preamble. "Took Zoe to her parents' house in Columbus. Says she needs time to think." "And how are you doing, baby?" I asked, already reaching for my purse, ready to go to him. "Not good, Mama. Not good at all." His voice cracked on the last word, and my heart broke for my son. Marcus is still here with me, but I don't know what to do. "I'm coming over," I said, already heading for the door. "No, Mom. You don't have to." "Calvin Johnson, I am your mother. There's nowhere else I need to be right now, except with my son and my grandson. Now, do y'all need me to bring dinner?" For the first time in our conversation, I heard a ghost of a laugh. "Actually, yeah, that would be good." 3 hours later, I was in Calvin's kitchen, the countertops covered with the makings of my special Sunday dinner. Fried chicken, collard greens, mac and cheese, cornbread, and peach cobbler. For dessert, the house that had always felt like a museum, too perfect to touch, now looked lived in, almost shabby. Dishes in the sink, mail piled on the counter, a basketball jersey draped over a chair. Marcus was helping me, awkwardly cutting biscuits, with a glass the way I'd taught him at my house. "You think Mom's coming back?" he asked quietly, eyes fixed on his task. I paused, choosing my words carefully. "I don't know, sweetheart. But whatever happens, you're going to be okay. We all are. Sometimes families have to break apart a little bit to come back together stronger." He nodded, absorbing this in that thoughtful way he had. "Grandma?" "Yes, baby?" "I'm sorry about what I said at Thanksgiving, about you sitting in the kitchen. Mom told me to say it, and I didn't know how to say no." I put down my wooden spoon and turned to face him fully. "Marcus, look at me." He raised his eyes, so much like Calvin's at that age. "You have nothing to be sorry for. Nothing. You hear me? You were a child caught in an adult situation. I never blamed you, not for 1 second." He nodded, blinking rapidly. "Now come here and give your grandma a hug. These biscuits can wait." As I held my grandson close, feeling his shoulders that were just starting to broaden, I made a silent promise. No matter what happened with Calvin and Vanessa, no matter how this family might reshape itself in the coming months, I would never again allow myself to be pushed to the margins of my own family's life. Never again would I sit in the kitchen while life went on without me in the dining room, because some lessons come at too high a price to be forgotten. Summer came hot and heavy, settling over Cincinnati like a wool blanket. Calvin and Vanessa were officially separated by then, with lawyers involved and Marcus spending weekends at Vanessa's parents' house in Columbus. Zoe was staying there full time, which broke my heart. That little girl needed her daddy and her brother. But Vanessa insisted she needed stability, as if splitting a family in two could ever provide that. I found myself spending more time at Calvin's house than my own. Not because he asked me to, but because he didn't know how to ask for help. My son, who had climbed so high and built walls around himself with his achievements, didn't know how to say he was drowning. One evening in July, I arrived with groceries to find him sitting in the dark living room, a glass of something amber in his hand, staring at nothing. "Calvin." I set the bags down and switched on a lamp. "Baby, what's going on?" He looked up, at me with red-rimmed eyes. I got a call from Zoe's summer camp today. She had a meltdown, crying for me. The counselor said she's been having nightmares, wetting the bed. He took a long swallow from his glass. And Vanessa won't let me go get her. Says it would be disruptive to her routine. I sat beside him on the couch, feeling the anger rise in me like a tide. That child needs her father. I know, Mama, but the lawyers say I need to follow the temporary custody agreement or it could hurt my case for joint custody. He set his glass down and put his head in his hands. How did we get here? How did I let things get so messed up? I put my arm around his shoulders, remembering when they were small enough for me to carry him on my hip. Life has a way of taking wrong turns when we're not paying attention. The question is, what are you going to do now? He looked at me, really looked at me, for what felt like the first time in years. I don't know. Everything I built is falling apart. The business. My marriage, my family. I feel like I'm back at square one. Square one ain't such a bad place to be sometimes, I said softly. It's a chance to build something new. Something true. We sat in silence for a while, the only sound the hum of the air conditioning fighting against the summer heat. You know, I finally said, your daddy went through something like this once. Calvin's head snapped up. Dad? But you two were always so solid. I laughed, a soft, sad sound. Child, every marriage has its earthquakes. You just don't always see the cracks. From the outside. What happened? It was 1987. You were about 7. Lisa was 5. Your daddy lost his job at the plant. They were moving operations overseas. He couldn't find work for almost a year. Started drinking too much, staying out late. I was teaching full-time and coming home to take care of you kids. The house, everything. We were fighting all the time. Calvin stared at me, shocked. I don't remember any of this. That's because we protected you from it. That's what parents do. I patted his knee. Anyway, one night, James didn't come home at all. Stayed out till morning. When he finally showed up, I was so angry I thought, I might actually kill that man. What did you do? I told him to leave. Said I couldn't do it anymore. Couldn't hold everything together while he was falling apart. And did he go? I nodded. For 2 weeks. Stayed with his cousin in Dayton. Longest 2 weeks of my life. But something happened while he was gone. He hit bottom, I guess you could say. Realized what he was throwing away. So what changed? He came back home, sober and humble. Got down on his knees in our kitchen and promised me and the Lord that he was going to be the man his family deserved. And you know what? He kept that promise every day until the day he died. Calvin was quiet, absorbing this revelation about the father he had idolized. Why didn't you ever tell me this before? Some stories aren't meant to be told until they're needed, I said simply. And I think maybe you needed this one now. The next morning, Calvin called in sick to work, something I'd never known him to do in his entire professional life. And we drove to Columbus together. He called Vanessa from the road, not asking permission, but simply informing her that he was coming to see his daughter. When we pulled up to Judith and Harold's imposing house, Vanessa was waiting on the front porch, arms crossed and face set, in stone. But the moment the car stopped, the front door flew open, and Zoe came running out, her little legs pumping as fast as they could go. "Daddy!" she screamed, launching herself into Calvin's arms as he knelt to catch her. I stayed in the car, watching through the windshield as my son held his daughter, both of them crying now. Vanessa stood on the porch, her posture gradually softening as she witnessed their reunion. When she finally looked over at the car and saw me, I gave her a small nod. Not forgiveness, not yet, but acknowledgement. We were both part of this family, whether we liked it or not. Calvin spent the day with Zoe, taking her to a park while I sat awkwardly in Judith and Harold's living room, making stilted conversation about the weather and their golf club memberships. By the time Calvin and Zoe returned, sunburnt and happy, something had shifted. Vanessa agreed that Zoe could come stay with Calvin for the rest of the week, and they would revisit the custody arrangement with their lawyers. As we drove back to Cincinnati that evening, Zoe asleep in the back seat with her head on my lap, Calvin glanced over at me. "Thank you, Mama." "For what?" "For not giving up on me, even when I gave up on myself." I reached over and squeezed his hand. "That's not how this works. Mothers don't give up. It's not in our job description." In August, Lisa called with news that made my heart sing. They had found a house in Pleasant Ridge, just 20 minutes from my place, and would be moving back to Cincinnati by the end of the month. When I told Calvin, he immediately offered to help with the move. And for the first time in years, I saw a glimpse of my children as they used to be. A team, connected by something deeper than blood. The day Lisa and her family arrived, driving a moving truck with their car towed behind, was like a homecoming I hadn't known I was waiting for. Theo, her husband, had always been quiet but kind, and their 2 children, Amara, 12, and Devon, 9, were bright, curious souls who called me Grandma Dot and asked a million questions about everything. We formed a human chain to unload the truck, passing boxes from hand to hand like a church congregation passing the collection plate. Marcus and Devon immediately bonded over their shared love of basketball, while Zoe followed Amara around like a devoted puppy, thrilled to have an older girl cousin to admire. As evening fell, we sat on Lisa's new front porch, eating pizza from cardboard boxes and drinking sweet tea from plastic cups, looking around at my family. Calvin laughing at something Theo said, Lisa braiding Zoe's hair, the boys shooting hoops in the driveway. I felt a completeness I hadn't experienced in years. "Penny for your thoughts, Mama," Lisa said, noticing my quiet contemplation. "Just thinking about how life has a way of coming full circle," I replied. "Sometimes you have to lose something to find out what really matters." She nodded, understanding in her eyes. "Calvin told me about Thanksgiving, about you sitting in the kitchen." Her voice held a controlled anger. "I wish I had known." "It's in the past now," I said, though we both knew that wasn't entirely true. Some wounds leave scars that ache when the weather changes. "Not completely," she said, lowering her voice. "Vanessa called me last week." I raised my eyebrows, surprised. Lisa and Vanessa had never been close. "She wanted to apologize, I guess. Said she's been doing therapy, working through some of her own issues about race and class. Said she never meant to hurt you, but she knows she did." "And what did you say?" Lisa gave a small, wry smile. "I told her apologies are meant for the person you wronged, not their daughter, and that some things take more than words to fix." I nodded, proud of my fierce girl who had always known her own mind. "She's right about that. But, you know, forgiveness isn't just for the person who did. Wrong. Sometimes it's a gift you give yourself." "You're thinking about forgiving her, after everything." I looked out at the gathering dusk, at my grandchildren playing in the yard, at my son who was slowly finding his way back to himself. "I'm thinking about moving forward, for all our sakes." September brought the start of a new school year. Calvin had enrolled Zoe in the elementary school near his house, and Marcus was starting his junior year of high school. I found myself busy with a volunteer position teaching reading at my old school. Not ready to fully retire, it seemed. One evening my doorbell rang unexpectedly. When I opened it, Vanessa stood on my porch, looking smaller somehow, less polished than I remembered. "Dorothy," she said, her voice hesitant. "I was hoping we could talk." I studied her for a moment, this woman who had caused so much pain in our family. But I also saw something I hadn't noticed before. A vulnerability, a crack in the perfect facade. "Come on in," I said, stepping aside. I just made some coffee. We sat at my kitchen table, the same table where I had nursed Calvin through chickenpox and helped Lisa with her college applications, where James and I had paid bills and planned vacations and argued and made up. "I owe you an apology," Vanessa said, curling her hands around the mug I'd given her. "A big one." "Yes," I agreed. "You do." She looked startled at my directness, then nodded. "I treated you badly, disrespectfully. I was ashamed of myself, I think. Ashamed that I couldn't live up to this image I had of what my life should be like. And instead of looking at my own issues, I put that on you. Made you the outsider because it was easier than facing my own feelings of not belonging." I listened, neither accepting nor rejecting her words yet. "My parents," she continued, "they raised me with certain expectations about who I should associate with, who I should marry. When I fell in love with Calvin, it challenged a lot of what they believed. What I believed, if I'm being honest. And so you tried to reshape him," I said. "Reshape his family. Make us fit the mold." She nodded, tears filling her eyes. "I didn't see it that way then, but yes, that's exactly what I did. And I'm so sorry, Dorothy. So deeply sorry." I took a deep breath, feeling the weight of decades. Not just my own experiences, but my parents, my grandparents, all the generations of black folks who had been told they weren't good enough, weren't welcome at the table. "Vanessa, I appreciate your apology. I truly do. But understanding needs to come before forgiveness. Do you understand what it meant for me? A black woman who lived through segregation, who fought for everything I ever had. To be told I should eat in the kitchen while everyone else sat at the table. Do you understand the history you were invoking?" Her face paled. I didn't think of it that way." "No, you didn't, and that's part of the problem." She nodded, accepting this truth. "I want to do better. For Zoe and Marcus, for Calvin, and for you, if you'll let me try." I looked at this woman, the mother of my grandchildren, and saw something I hadn't seen before. The possibility of growth, of change. "Well," I said finally, "I suppose we all deserve a second chance. But Vanessa? Yes? This Thanksgiving, everyone eats at the same table, or no one eats at all." For the first time that evening she smiled, a real smile that reached her eyes. I wouldn't have it any other way. As she left, I stood on my porch watching her drive away, feeling like something long frozen was finally beginning to thaw. Not healed, not yet, but moving in that direction. Inside, I looked at the old photo of James on our wedding day, his smile as bright as the future we thought lay ahead of us. "Well," I said to his image, "you always did say forgiveness was the hardest and holiest work we ever do." And in the quiet of my home, I could almost hear him agree. As October painted the trees in fire colors, our family started to find a new rhythm. Calvin and Vanessa were in counseling, both couples and individual, and had agreed to a more balanced custody arrangement for the children. Marcus spent most weekdays with his father, weekends with his mother, and Zoe did the opposite. It wasn't perfect, But the children seemed more settled, less caught in the crossfire. Lisa had invited me to Sunday dinners at her new house, a tradition. We'd started in my home when her children were small, sitting at her table watching Theo carve a roast while Devin and Marcus argued good-naturedly about basketball stats. I felt a rightness, a sense of things falling back into their proper places. "Mama, have you thought about Thanksgiving?" Lisa asked one Sunday as we washed dishes together, her hands soapy in the sink, mine drying each plate with care. The question hung between us, heavier than it should have been. Thanksgiving, the holiday that had become a symbol of all that had gone wrong in our family. "Calvin mentioned something about hosting at his place," I said carefully. "Said Vanessa. Agreed it would be good for the kids to have everyone together." Lisa's hands stilled in the soapy water. "And how do you feel about that?" I set down the plate I was drying and leaned against the counter. "Honestly, I don't know. Part of me wants to say yes, to move forward, but another part is still hurt." She finished for me. I nodded. "It's foolish, I know, holding on to old pain." "It's not foolish, Mama." Lisa turned to face me, her eyes, so like her father's, serious and deep. "What happened wasn't just a slight. It was a rejection of who you are, of where we come from. Some things aren't easy to forgive. But they're necessary to forgive," I said softly, "if we're going to heal as a family." She studied my face. "You've already decided, haven't you?" I smiled. "When did you get so good at reading your old mama?" "Around the same time you taught me that holding grudges is like drinking poison and expecting the other person to die." She dried her hands on a towel and hugged me. "If you're ready, then we'll all be there." That night I called Calvin and told him yes. We would all come to Thanksgiving at his house. I could hear the relief in his voice, like a man who'd been holding his breath for too long. "Thanks, Mama. This means a lot to all of us." "Just one condition," I said, my voice firm. "Anything. I'm bringing my sweet potato pie, and nobody's putting it in any nicer dishes." He laughed, a real laugh that took me back to when he was a boy, carefree and joyful. "Deal. And Mama, your pie was always better than anything store-bought anyway." The weeks leading up to Thanksgiving were busy with preparation. I helped Calvin deep clean his house, noticing how it had changed since Vanessa moved out. More lived in, less like a showroom. There were children's drawings on the refrigerator, books left open on end tables, shoes kicked off by the door. It felt like a home now, not a museum. Marcus was helping us clean out the garage when he found a box of old photo albums I didn't even know Calvin had kept. "Dad, what are these?" he asked, blowing dust off a leather-bound album. Calvin came over, recognition dawning on his face. "Those are our old family photos, from when your Aunt Lisa and I were kids." We spent the rest of the afternoon sitting on the garage floor, paging through memories. Calvin's Little League games, Lisa's dance recitals, family vacations to, the lake where James taught them to fish, Christmas mornings with wrapping paper strewn everywhere. "You guys look so happy," Marcus said, studying a photo of us all at Cedar Point Amusement Park. Calvin missing his front teeth in a wide grin, Lisa's hair in beaded braids. "We were," I said, touching the image of James's face, forever young, in the photograph. "Not rich, not perfect, but happy." Calvin looked at me over Marcus's head. "I forgot how much fun we had, how you and Dad made everything special, even when we didn't have much." "That's what family does," I said simply. "It's not about the things, it's about the love." Later, as I was heading home, Calvin walked me to my car. Mama, there's something I should tell you about Thanksgiving. I felt a flicker of apprehension. What is it? Vanessa's parents will be there too. They asked to come. My hand tightened on my purse strap. Harold and Judith with their country club memberships and thinly veiled condescension. The last time I'd seen them was at Zoe's birthday party 2 years ago, where Judith had complimented my dress by saying it was so colorful. You people always know how to make a statement. I see, I said, keeping my voice neutral. And you said yes. Calvin nodded, looking apologetic. For the kids. They're still their grandparents. But Mama, I talked with them. Made it clear that things have to be different, that they need to show respect to you and our family history. And they agreed. I looked at my son, standing tall in the fading autumn light. How different he seemed from the man who had let his wife banish his mother to the kitchen. There was a strength in him now, a certainty that reminded me of his father. Well, I said finally, I suppose we'll see, won't we? The week of Thanksgiving arrived with a cold snap that had everyone digging out scarves and gloves. I spent Wednesday baking 3 sweet potato pies, a peach cobbler, and a pound cake that had been my mother's recipe. The familiar rhythm of measuring, mixing, and baking centered me, connected me to all the women in my lineage who had stood at stoves and created sustenance and joy from simple ingredients. As I worked, I thought about Mama Pearl and how she would handle tomorrow. Head high, heart open, boundaries firm, she would say, and always leave room for grace, but not for foolishness. Thanksgiving morning dawned clear and cold. I dressed, carefully in a rust-colored dress that James had always loved, gold earrings he'd given me for our 25th anniversary, and my good shoes, comfortable enough to stand in the kitchen helping, but nice enough to show I had made an effort. As I drove to Calvin's house, I felt a strange mix of emotions, hope and anxiety, forgiveness, and the memory of hurt. When I pulled into the driveway, Lisa's car was already there, along with a silver Mercedes I recognized as Harold and Judith's. Taking a deep breath, I gathered my pies and headed for the door. Calvin answered my knock, wearing an apron and a warm smile. "Happy Thanksgiving, Mama," he said, enfolding me in a hug that smelled of sage and rosemary. Inside, the house was warm and alive with activity. Lisa and Theo were in the living room, with Harold and Judith, the adults sipping mimosas while the children played a board game on the coffee table. Vanessa was in the kitchen, hair pulled back in a simple ponytail, checking something in the oven. When she saw me, she straightened up, wiping her hands on her apron. "Dorothy, happy Thanksgiving." Her voice was warm but nervous. "Happy Thanksgiving, Vanessa," I replied, setting my pies on the counter. "The place smells wonderful." "Thanks. I'm trying that cornbread dressing recipe you gave Calvin, though I'm sure it won't be as good as yours." It was an olive branch, small but significant. "Well, let me taste it and see," I said, moving toward the stove. Sometimes it just needs a little more sage. For the next hour, Vanessa and I worked side by side in the kitchen, a careful dance of cooperation. She had clearly made an effort to incorporate dishes from my tradition. Collard greens, mac and cheese, candied yams, alongside her own family favorites. When Lisa came in to help, she raised an eyebrow at me, silently asking if I was okay. I nodded, and she rolled up her sleeves to join us. "Just like old times," she said, bumping my hip with hers as she reached for a cutting board. "Except Dad isn't stealing bites of everything and getting his hand slapped." I laughed, the sound surprising me with its ease. That man could never wait for anything to be properly done. Always had to sample. "Marcus is the same way," Vanessa said, looking up from the gravy she was stirring. Calvin caught him sneaking stuffing out of the bird before it was even cooked last year. And just like that, we were sharing stories, finding common ground in the men we loved, in the children who carried their traits forward. When it was time to eat, Calvin called everyone to the dining room. The table was set beautifully, autumn-colored linens and flickering candles creating a warm glow. 9 places were set, Calvin at one end, Vanessa at the other, with the rest of us arranged between. As we took our seats, I found myself directly across from Judith. She met my eyes briefly, then looked away, a flush rising on her pale cheeks. Harold cleared his throat, looking uncomfortable in the way of a man unused to acknowledging his mistakes. Calvin remained standing, looking around at all of us gathered at his table. "Before we eat, I'd like to say something." He took a deep breath. "This past year has been difficult for all of us. We've faced challenges, made mistakes, hurt each other in ways we never meant to." His eyes found mine, then moved to Vanessa's. "But we're here now, together. And I'm grateful for that. Grateful for second chances and new beginnings." He raised his glass. "To family. Not perfect, but ours." "To family," we echoed, glasses raised. As dishes were passed and plates filled, I felt a tap on my arm. It was Judith, holding out the bowl of collard greens. "Dorothy," she said, her voice low, "I want to apologize for many things, but especially for how we treated you last time we were all together. It was inexcusable." I looked at this woman, with her perfect hair and designer clothes, and saw something I hadn't noticed before. Fear. Fear of difference, fear of change, fear of a world that was leaving her version of proper behind. "Thank you, Judith," I said simply, accepting both the greens and the apology. "That means a lot." The meal progressed, conversation flowing more easily than I had dared to hope. The children kept us laughing with their stories and observations, and even Harold unbent enough to share an amusing tale about his first disastrous attempt at golfing. When it was time for dessert, Calvin insisted on serving my sweet potato pie himself, placing a slice on each plate with a flourish. "My mama's pie," he announced, "is famous in 3 counties, and no fancy dish in the world could make it taste any better than it does straight from her kitchen." Across the table, Vanessa caught my eye and smiled, a real smile that reached her eyes. "He's right about that," she said. "I've never tasted better." Later, as the evening wound down and the dishes were cleared, I found myself on the back deck with Calvin. The night was cold but clear, stars pricking the dark sky like diamonds scattered on velvet. "You okay, Mama?" he asked, draping a blanket around my shoulders. "I am," I said, surprised to find it was true. It wasn't perfect, but it was real, and that's something. He nodded, understanding. "I've been thinking a lot about Dad lately, about what he would think of all this." "He'd be proud of you," I said without hesitation, "for finding your way back to what matters." Calvin was quiet for a moment, looking up at the stars. "You know, when I was little, Dad used to tell me that family is like the North Star. No matter how lost you get, if you can find it, you can find your way home." I smiled, hearing James's voice in the words. "Your daddy always did have a way," with a metaphor. "I got lost for a while," Calvin admitted. "Thought success meant leaving certain things behind. But all I did was lose my compass." I reached out and took his hand, strong and warm in mine. "The important thing is, you found it again." As we stood there in the cold night, I thought about the journey we'd been on, from that painful Thanksgiving where I sat alone in the kitchen, to this moment of reconnection and healing. Not everything was fixed. There were still hurts to heal, trust to rebuild. But we had made a start. And sometimes that's all you can ask for. A chance to begin again, to do better, to love more fully, and see more clearly. A chance to gather around the same table, not perfect but family, which, in the end, is the greatest blessing of all. 3 years have passed since that healing Thanksgiving at Calvin's house. 3 years of rebuilding, of learning to trust again, of creating new traditions while honoring the old ones. It hasn't always been easy. Family never is. But we've come a long way from the broken pieces we once were. Calvin and Vanessa never did get back together. But they found something perhaps more valuable. A way to co-parent with respect, and even friendship. The divorce was finalized without the bitterness that tears so many families apart. Vanessa bought a house just 10 minutes from Calvin's, close enough for the children to bike between homes during the summer months. Lisa and Theo have settled beautifully into Cincinnati life. Theo's job at a financial firm downtown is going well, and Lisa started a community arts program for children in Avondale, the neighborhood where we raised her. Every time I visit the colorful storefront, with its walls covered in children's artwork, my heart swells with pride at the woman my daughter has become. Marcus graduated high school last spring, 18 now, and headed to Howard University in the fall, his father's alma mater, though that wasn't why he chose it. They have the best program for what I want to study, he told me when he got his acceptance letter. And I want to connect with my heritage. The fact that he saw his blackness as something to embrace rather than escape was healing for all of us, especially Calvin. Zoe, at 13, is all long limbs and attitude, her hair worn in natural curls that Vanessa has finally learned to care for properly, with a little help from Lisa and me. She plays clarinet in the school band and wants to be a marine biologist, or maybe a rapper, depending on the day you ask her. And me? I'm 71 now, with more silver than black in my hair and knees that protest when the weather changes. But I'm more at peace than I've been in years, surrounded by family who see me, really see me, and value what I bring to their lives. Today is Thanksgiving again, the holiday that once broke us, now a symbol of our healing. This year we're all gathering at my house. The first time I've hosted the whole extended family since James died. I've spent days preparing, polishing his mother's silver, bringing out the good china, making lists and checking them twice. "Mama, you don't have to do all this," Lisa said when she stopped by yesterday and found me up on a stepladder cleaning ceiling fans. "We'd be happy with paper plates and pizza." "I know," I said, carefully stepping down, "because these old bones don't bounce like they used to. But I want to. This house hasn't had this many people in it for a celebration in too long. The truth is, I needed this. Needed to fill these rooms with laughter and conversation, with the scent of good food and the warmth of family. Since James died, I've kept his presence alive in this house, talking to him in the quiet evenings, feeling him in the garden where his roses still bloom. But houses are meant for living, for making new memories alongside the treasured old ones. This morning I woke before dawn, the way I always do on important days, sat on the edge of my bed and had my usual conversation with James. "Well, old man," I said to the empty space beside me, "today's the day. The whole family's coming, even Harold and Judith." I chuckled. I never thought I'd see the day when I'd willingly set a table for those two. But here we are. People can surprise you, I guess. In the soft darkness, I could almost hear his laugh, feel the weight of his hand on mine. "I wish you were here to see it, love, to see how our babies have grown, how they've found their way through the hard times. You'd be so proud." As the first light of dawn crept through my curtains, I rose and began my day, moving through the familiar rhythm of Thanksgiving preparations. Turkey in the oven by 8, pies already baked and cooling on the rack, vegetables prepped and ready for cooking. Around 10, my doorbell rang, earlier than I expected anyone. When I opened it, Vanessa stood there, a bouquet of fall flowers, in her arms. "I thought you might want some help," she said, "and I wanted to learn how to make your cornbread dressing properly, if that's okay." I smiled, opening the door wider. "Come on in. There's always room for another pair of hands in my kitchen." Over the next hour, I showed her how to crumble the cornbread just so, how much sage to add, more than the recipe calls for, and the secret ingredient my mother taught me, a splash of the turkey drippings to make it rich and moist. As we, worked, Vanessa spoke hesitantly. "Dorothy, there's something I've been wanting to tell you. I've been doing a lot of work on myself these past few years. Therapy, yes, but also education. Learning about things I was never taught." I nodded, encouraging her to continue. "Growing up, I was so insulated. From reality, from history, from people who didn't look like me or live like me. My parents meant well, I think, but they raised me in this bubble where I never had to confront my own privilege or the realities of race in America." She looked down at her hands, flour-dusted and working alongside mine. "When I married Calvin, I thought I was being so progressive. But I didn't do the work to understand his experience, his family's experience, your experience." "And now?" I asked quietly. "Now I'm trying, really trying. For myself, but mostly for Zoe and Marcus. I don't want them to inherit my blindness." She looked up, meeting my eyes directly. "And I want to thank you for giving me the chance to learn, to be part of this family, even after everything." I reached out and squeezed her flower-covered hand with my own. "That's what family does. It makes room for growth, for change, for redemption." By noon, the house was filling up, Lisa and Theo arriving with their children and a green bean casserole, Calvin bringing extra chairs from his garage, Marcus and his new girlfriend Aisha helping to set the table, Zoe and Devon arguing good-naturedly about music while they arranged flowers. Harold and Judith arrived last, looking slightly uncomfortable but making an effort. Judith had brought homemade cranberry sauce, and Harold carried in several bottles of wine. "Dorothy," he said, handing me the wine with an awkward half-bow, "thank you for including us today." "Family is family," I replied simply. "Even the complicated parts." As we all gathered in my dining room, expanded with card tables on either end to accommodate everyone, I looked around at these faces I loved. My children, my grandchildren, even the in-laws who had once been a source of such pain, now all gathered under my roof, at my table. Calvin stood to carve the turkey, looking so much like his father in that moment that my breath caught. He had grown into himself these past few years, found a balance between ambition and authenticity that had eluded him before. His business had recovered from its troubles, but he worked fewer hours now, prioritizing time with his children and increasingly with me. "Before we eat," he said, "I'd like to ask Mom to say a few words. This is her house, her table, and we're all here because of her love and forgiveness." All eyes turned to me, and for a moment I felt overwhelmed. But then I looked at James's empty chair, kept at the table as always, and found my voice. "When I was a little girl in Mississippi," I began, "my grandmother told me that a family table is sacred ground. It's where we come together. Not just to nourish our bodies, but to nourish our connections to each other. It's where we share not just food, but our stories, our truths, our lives. I looked around the table, meeting each pair of eyes in turn. We've been through some hard times, this family. We've hurt each other, misunderstood each other, failed each other in big and small ways. But we're here now, all of us, together at the same table, and there's a kind of holiness in that, a kind of miracle. My voice caught, and Lisa reached over to squeeze my hand. I squeezed back, drawing strength from her touch. James used to say that family isn't just who you're born to. It's who you choose to love, day after day, even when it's hard, especially when it's hard. I see that love around this table today, and I am grateful beyond words. I raised my glass. To family. Messy, complicated, beautiful family. To family, they echoed, glasses raised. As we ate, conversation flowed easily, punctuated by laughter and the occasional friendly disagreement. Marcus told stories about his campus visit to Howard, eyes bright with excitement for his future. Zoe demonstrated her latest TikTok dance, to the amusement of the adults and the mock horror of her teenage cousins. Even Judith joined in, sharing a surprisingly funny story about her first attempt at making Thanksgiving dinner as a newlywed, when she had forgotten to remove the bag of giblets from inside the turkey. The smoke alarm went off, the fire department came, and poor Harold had to take me out for Chinese food. She concluded, laughing at herself in a way I'd never seen before. "Grandma Dot?" Amara asked during a lull in the conversation. "Is it true you once had to eat Thanksgiving dinner in the kitchen while everyone else ate in the dining room?" A hush fell over the table. Lisa looked mortified, clearly having not realized her daughter knew this story. "Amara, that's not appropriate," she began, but I held up my hand. "It's all right," I said. "It's part of our family history, and we don't need to hide it." I turned to my granddaughter's curious face. "Yes, sweetheart, that happened. 3 years ago, at Uncle Calvin's house." "But why?" she persisted, 14 now and full of questions about justice and fairness. I looked around the table, at Calvin's pained expression, at Vanessa's flushed cheeks, at Harold and Judith's discomfort. But I also saw an opportunity for truth, for the kind of honest reckoning that allows real healing. Because sometimes, I said carefully, people forget to see each other's humanity. They get caught up in appearances, in what they think matters, and they forget what really does matter: kindness, respect, the bonds that connect us. It wasn't just about me sitting in the kitchen. It was about being made to feel less than invisible, not worthy of a place at the table. "That's terrible," Devon said, his young face serious. "That's like racism, right?" Another loaded silence fell. "Yes," I said simply. "It was." Vanessa looked down at her plate, tears in her eyes. Calvin reached across and took my hand. "But here's the important part of the story," I continued. "We all made mistakes, all of us, and we all had a choice: to stay broken, or to try to heal, to hold on to hurt, or to reach for understanding." I looked at each of my grandchildren in turn. The real lesson isn't about who did what wrong. It's about how we found our way back to each other, how we learned to see each other, really see each other, and make room at the table for everyone, in all our complicated humanity. Zoe, surprisingly, was the one who broke the tension. "Well, I think it's dumb that anyone would want Grandma Dot in the kitchen. Her sweet potato pie is like the best thing ever, and you'd want her where she could make more, not hide her away." Laughter rippled around the table, grateful for the release. "Smart girl," Calvin said, ruffling his daughter's curls. Definitely gets her brains from my side of the family. In your dreams, Vanessa shot back, but she was smiling. As the meal went on, I found myself watching more than participating, taking in the tableau before me. My family, whole and healing, gathered around my table. Not perfect, still learning, but trying. Really trying. After dessert, as everyone moved to the living room for coffee and conversation, I slipped out onto the back porch for a moment of quiet. The November air was crisp, the sky clear and star-strewn above me. We did all right, didn't we, James? I whispered to the night. Our babies found their way. A warm presence seemed to settle around my shoulders, like a familiar embrace, and in that moment I knew, as surely as I've ever known anything, that love doesn't end. It transforms, it evolves. It sometimes hides itself in pain or anger or misunderstanding. But it remains stubborn as a heartbeat, waiting to be recognized again. The back door opened, spilling light onto the porch. Calvin stepped out, concern on his face. Mama, you okay out here? It's getting cold. I smiled at my son, this man who had traveled so far to come back home to himself. I'm just fine, baby. Just having a little talk with your daddy. He nodded, understanding. After a moment, he said, You know, I think about that Thanksgiving a lot. The one where... I know, I said, saving him from having to say it. I'm still ashamed that I let it happen, that I didn't stand up for you. I turned to face him fully. Calvin Johnson, you listen to me. We all make mistakes, all of us. The measure of a person isn't in never falling. It's in how they get back up again. And you, my son, got back up with courage and honesty. I couldn't be prouder of the man you've become. His eyes shone in the dim light. I learned from the best. From inside came the sound of laughter, of family enjoying each other's company. The warmth of it reached us even through the closed door. We should go back in, I said. It's too cold to stay out here. Calvin offered me his arm, a gesture of both support and respect. Yes, ma'am. Can't have the guest of honor catching a chill. As we stepped back into the light and warmth of my home, into the embrace of our imperfect, beautiful family, I felt a sense of completion, of coming full circle, from the little girl in Mississippi whose parents worked cotton fields so she could get an education, to the woman who built a life and a family with a good man, to the mother who watched her children stumble and find their way again, to the grandmother now surrounded by a new generation carrying forward both our struggles and our triumphs. It's a long way from that kitchen counter where I sat alone 3 Thanksgivings ago, eating turkey that tasted like ashes. A long journey from invisibility to being truly seen, from exclusion to belonging. But here's what I know now, what I want my grandchildren and their children after them to understand. Family is not a fixed thing. It's not perfect or unchanging. It's a living, breathing entity that grows and stumbles, heals, and sometimes breaks again. The table where we gather is both literal and symbolic, a place where we must continually make room for each other's full humanity, where we practice the hard, holy work of loving each other through our flaws and failures. And no one belongs in the kitchen when everyone else is in the dining room. Unless, of course, that's where the pie is, in which case we all belong there, together, celebrating the sweetness we create from the most basic ingredients: love, forgiveness, and the courage to begin again.
Thank you for listening to this story. If it touched your heart, make sure to subscribe to our channel and stay with us for the next story. It's already waiting for you on the screen. Because every story told by a grandmother carries the strength of generations. Click and keep listening. We'll be right here.